Hello and welcome. My name is Alan, and today we are back with more of the Prose Edda. Today we officially get into some of the actual Edda itself. So, here we go. In the beginning. In the beginning, Almighty God created heaven and earth and all that pertains to them. Lastly, he created two people, Adam and Eve, and from them came clans, whose descendants multiplied and spread across the whole world. But as time passed, people became dissimilar from one another. Some were good and held to the right beliefs, but the large majority turned to the desires of this world and neglected God's commandments. For this reason, God drowned the world and all its living things in a flood, except for those who were on the ark with Noah. After Noah's flood, 8 people remained alive, and they inhabited the world, and from them are descended the families of man. Again, as before, when their numbers had grown and they had settled throughout the world, the majority of mankind loved worldly desires and ambition. They abandoned their obedience to God, going so far as that they no longer desired to uh, to name God. Who then was able to tell their sons about God's wondrous deeds? Thus they lost God's name, and nobody could be found anywhere in the world who knew his Maker. Nevertheless, God granted men the earthly gifts of wealth and happiness to enable them to enjoy the world. He also gave them the wisdom to understand all earthly things and all the separate things that could be seen of the sky and the earth. People thought of these things, wondering what it could mean that the earth and animals and birds were in some ways similar, even though their natures were not alike. One of the Earth's features is that when the high mountains were dug into, water springs up, and even in the deep valleys, it is not necessary to dig down any further for water. The same is true in animals and birds, whose blood is equally close to the surface and on the head and feet. A second characteristic of the earth is that grass and flowers bloom every year, but in the same year everything withers and drops off. So it is that so it is with the animals and the birds. Um, Hair and feathers grow on them, but each year they fall away. The third characteristic of the earth is that when it is opened or dug into, grass grows over the soil that is closest to the surface. People think of rocks and stones as comparable to the teeth and bones of living creatures. Thus, they understand that the earth is alive and has a life of its own. They also know that in terms of years, the earth is wondrously old and powerful in its own nature. It gives birth to all living things and claims in its own nature or, and claims ownership over all that dies. For this reason, they give it a name and trace their origins to it. From the ancestors, people also learned that the earth, the sun, and the heavenly bodies remain constant after many hundreds of years have been reckoned. But the paths of the heavenly bodies change unequally. Some have longer courses, whereas others shorter. From such observations, people suppose that perhaps a controlling being was guiding the heavenly bodies, deciding their paths according to his wishes, and that this being be very powerful and mighty. They surmise that if he ruled over the main elements of nature, he existed before the heavenly bodies. They also perceive that if he ruled um, the movement of the heavenly bodies, he governed the sun's shining, the moisture from the air, um, and also the resulting fruits from the earth and the winds in the sky that raise storms at sea. People did not know where his kingdom was. Because of this, they believed that he ruled over all things on earth and in the sky, in the heavens and the heavenly bodies, and in the sea and the weather. In order to recount these beliefs and to fix them in memory, they gave their own names to all things, and the nature of their beliefs changed in many ways as different nations were established and languages branched out. People understood all matters in an earthly way because they had been granted no spiritual wisdom. Therefore, they reckoned that all things were fashioned from material substances. 2. The parts of the world. The world was divided into 3 parts. From the south towards the west, up to the Mediterranean Sea in the part called Africa. Its southern region is hot and scorched by the sun. The second part begins in the west and continues northward towards the sea. It is called Europe or Enia. Its northern regions are so cold that no grass grows and no one can subsist there. Starting in the north and continuing across the eastern continent all the way to the south is a region called Asia. Everything in that part of the world is beautiful and stately, and the earth produces gold and gemstones. The middle of the world is also there, just as the earth in that region is more beautiful and better in all ways than other places, so too the people there are most endowed with all blessings, wisdom and strength, beauty, and every kind of skill. 3. The people of Troy and Thor. Near the middle of the world, a building and a living hall were constructed, which became the most renowned that have ever been. The place was named Troy and is found in the region we call Turkey. It was built much larger than others and in many ways with greater skill. Neither cost nor the resources of the country were spared. There were 12 kingdoms with one high king, and each kingdom belonged many groups who paid tribute. In the city there were 12 main chieftains. These rulers were supreme in all human attributes to the other people who had preceded them in the world. One of the kings was named Munin or Minon. He was married to Troan, the daughter of Priam, the chief king. They had a son who was named Tror, the one we call Thor. He was brought up in Thracia by a duke named Loricus, and when he was 10 years old, he received his father's weapons. So great was his beauty that when he was among other people, he stood out as elephant ivory does when inlaid in oak. His hair was more beautiful than gold. By the time he was 12-year old, he had acquired uh, his full strength. Then he was able to lift from the ground 10 bearskins all in a pile. Next, he killed his foster father, Loricus, and his wife, Laura, or Glora, and took possession of the realm of Thracia. We call that place Thrudheim, or Thrudheim. Afterwards, he traveled widely through many lands, exploring all parts of the world, and on his own, he overcame all manner of berserkers and giants, as well as one of the greatest dragons and many beasts. In the northern part of the world, he came across the prophetess called Sybil, whom we call Sif, and married her. No one knows Sif's ancestors. She was the loveliest of women, with hair like gold. Their son, named Loridi, was much like his father. Loridi's son was Einridi, his son Vingathor, his son Vinganir, his son Moda, his son Magi, his son Sesketh, his son Bedvig, his son Afra, whom we call Anar, his son Itraman, his son Heramad, his son Skjaldun, whom we call Skjod, his son Bif, whom we call Biar, his son Yar, his son Gudolf, his son Finn, and his son Freyja, whom we call Fridlif. He had a son named Vodin, the one we call Odin, an excellent man because of his wisdom and because he had every kind of accomplishment. His wife was named Frigida, we call Frigg. Part 4. Odin's Journey Northward. Odin had the gift of prophecy, as his wife also did, and through his learning he became aware that his name would become renowned in the northern part of the world and honored more than other kings. For this reason, he was eager to set off from Turkey, and he took with him on his journey a large following of people, young and old, men and women. So, too, they took with them many precious things. Wherever they went in their travels, tales of their splendor were told, making them seem more like gods than men. They journeyed without stopping until they reached the north, where they entered the region we now call Saxland. Where there Odin settled down for a long time, taking possession of much of the land. Odin had 3 of his sons guard the country. One of them, Vegdig, was a powerful king who ruled over East Saxland. His son Viturgils, whose sons were Vita, the father of Mangist, and Sigar, the father of Sveldeg, or Zvebdeg, whom we call Zvith, Zip, Dag. Odin's second son, named Beldeg, we call Balder. He held the land that is now called Westphalia. His son was Brand, and his son was Frodigar, whom we call Frodi. His son was Frevaven. His son was Vig, whose son Gevus we call Gavir. Odin's third son was named Sigi, whose son was Reyr. The men of this family ruled in what is now called France, and from them came the family called the Volsungs. From all of them, numerous and great families descend. Odin's journey continues, or part 5. Odin's journey continues, and the Aesir settle in the north. Then Odin set out, traveling north, and arrived in the country called Ridgataland. He took possession of all that he wanted in that land and made his son Skjold ruler. Skjold's son was named Fridleif, and from him are descended the kindred known as the Skjoldungs, the family of the kings of Denmark. What is now called Jutland was then called Ridgataland. He then went northward to what is now called Sweden, where a king named Gylfi lived. When the king learned of the journey of these Asians who were called Aesir, he went to meet them, offering to grant Odin as much authority in his kingdom as he wanted. Wherever they stayed in these lands, a time of peace and prosperity accompanied their journey, so that all believed the newcomers were the cause. This was because the local inhabitants saw that they were unlike any others that they had known in beauty and intelligence. Recognizing the land's rich possibilities, Odin chose a place for a town, the one that is now called Sigrun. He appointed leaders, and in accordance with the customs of Troy, he selected 12 men to administer the law of the land. In this way, he organized the laws as they had been in Troy, in the manner to which the Turks were accustomed. When he went north, continuing until he had reached the ocean, which people believed surrounded all lands, there in what is now called Norway, he placed his son in power. This son was named Semin, and Norway's kings, as well as its jarls and other important men of the kingdom, trace their descent to him, as it is told in Hale Yatal. Odin also had with him his son named Yngvi, who after him became a king in Sweden, and from whom those kinmen called the Ynglings were descended. The Aesir and some of their sons married women from the lands where they settled, and their families increased. They spread throughout Saxland, and from there throughout all the northern regions, so that their language, that of the men of Asia, became the native tongue in all of these lands. people think because of the names of their ancestors are recorded in genealogies, they can show that these names were part of the language that the Aesir brought here to the northern world, to Norway, Sweden, Denmark, and Saxland. In England, however, some names of ancient regions and places lead one to believe that the names originally came from another language. I'll go ahead and end this episode here. But yeah, that's all for the actual prologue, the book says. Yeah, Prose Edda, and then it starts. Come on now. It starts with prologue. So it says in the beginning. So I don't know if that's necessarily straight from the Prose Edda or is referring to it. Perhaps it is. I don't know. But yeah. But in the next episode, we get into the Gylfaginning. So yeah. Regardless, next episode we really will be getting into Norse mythology in depth. But yeah. But as always, educate thyself. Think, read, study, learn. Someone tries to tell you something you have trouble believing, ask them to cite their sources. I'll see you all in the next episode. Until then, later.